Welcome to episode 2 of FCLE Seminar, the Florida Civic Literacy Exam Podcast. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto. Today, we're tackling a landmark case in American constitutional law, Marbury versus Madison. This case is crucial for understanding the balance of power between the branches of government. This is all based on the guide put together by the Florida Department of Education. I've got the links to that study stuff in the show notes, so check those out. And don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to our podcast at FCLE Seminar on YouTube. Got it? Good. Let's get started. Landmark Supreme Court case number 1, Marbury versus Madison in 1803, and the birth of judicial review. Okay. Case background. Picture this. The year is 1800, and the political landscape is shifting. Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, defeats incumbent President John Adams, a Federalist. In a last-ditch effort to maintain Federalist control, Adams and Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1801. Now, this act creates new courts and judgeships. What this means is that right before Adams left office, he packed the courts with his party's people, the Federalist. Okay. It's really about to get much more dramatic. So one of the guys, William Marbury, he's like the lucky or really unlucky commissioned appointee named, Justice of the Peace. He was commissioned by the former president, John Adams, but there's a catch. His official commission never arrived because the incoming president, Jefferson, told his administration, hey, hold off on all those commissions. And that really caused some stirred up stuff. Yeah. On a side note, a commission is like, in this case, a signed and sealed document of appointment. It's kind of like if you're going up for a job and they're like, hey, you got the job, but you never received the actual confirming email that you sign and you send it back and then you start work. That's exactly what's going on. So back to the case, feeling totally thrown under the bus, Marbury takes his case to the Supreme Court, asking them to order the Secretary of State, James Madison, who's under the new president, Thomas Jefferson. He petitions to order the delivery of his commission. He's like, hey, I was appointed and you've got to give me the paperwork, seal the deal. Essentially, he's requesting a writ of mandamus. That is a court order compelling someone to perform a specific action. More on that later. The court's decision on all this. The Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice John Marshall, faces a big dilemma here. They have agreed that the Secretary of State, James Madison, actually acted illegally by withholding Marbury's commission because he was appointed by the previous president and the commissions were granted, but Secretary of State James Madison held them back. So never received that email, right? In modern times. Okay, so that's why Marbury petitioned for the writ of mandamus. Basically, he was like, y'all need to do your jobs. But here's the catch. Marbury requested or petitioned for that writ of mandamus. Instead of actually issuing the writ of mandamus, the court makes a groundbreaking decision about the law that Congress passed and the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. The court declares that the part of the Judiciary Act that allowed Marbury to bring his case directly to the Supreme Court, that part is unconstitutional. This is a big deal. The Constitution clearly outlines that the Supreme Court's jurisdiction and Congress overstepped its bounds by trying to expand its power. Let's get into this a little bit more, okay? The birth of judicial review. Now, by making this decision, the court establishes the power of judicial review. This means the Supreme Court has the authority to declare laws unconstitutional. What? That's so crazy sounding. So Congress can pass a law that may be unconstitutional, and it's up to the judicial branch to hold it up to the framework of the Constitution. It's a monumental moment that shifts the balance of power and solidifies the Supreme Court's role as a co-equal branch of the government. So let's connect this back. The constitutional principle here. The issue arose when the court compared Section 13 of the Judiciary Act to Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Here we have the law versus the Constitution. See, the articles of the Constitution go like this. Article 1 covers the legislative branch. Article 2 covers the executive branch, and Article 3 covers the judicial branch. So here we have the Supreme Court comparing the law passed by Congress to Article 3, judicial branch, of the Constitution. More specifically, this constitutional provision outlines the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction, limiting it to cases involving ambassadors, other public ministers, and councils, as well as those in which a state is a party. The court found that Section 13 of the Judiciary Act directly conflicted with the Constitution by expanding the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction beyond what the Constitution allowed. Now, that sounds very complicated, and that's why I'm like, hey, you're doing great. Man, thanks for hanging in there. Do you feel like a little bit smarter now? Yeah, that's because you're a rock star. Let's review. Marbury versus Madison is so much more than an angry man not receiving his appointment or his commission, actually. But what I want you to remember about Marbury versus Madison is the case established the principle of judicial review. When you think Marbury versus Madison, think judicial review. And remember, this power allows the Supreme Court to check the power of the legislative and executive branches. Interpretation? What does this all mean? It means the courts have the power to review laws passed by Congress and decide if they conflict with the Constitution. If they do, the courts can declare them unconstitutional and essentially nullify them. Well, how does that affect me? It protects individual rights. See, if a law violates the Constitution and harms someone's rights, the courts can step in and offer their wisdom. Marbury versus Madison is a fascinating case study in American politics and law. It's a story of power struggles, legal maneuvering, and the enduring importance of the Constitution. It's the foundation for a system where the Constitution reigns supreme and, most importantly, individual rights are protected. Join us again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy podcast, so you can start studying for your test. The important thing is to start studying and start studying today. Well, what are you waiting for? Like, subscribe, and leave your questions or comments for us at FCLE Seminar on YouTube, or hit me up on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you play your favorite podcasts. This podcast was recorded at the Pickens Multimedia Studio at the University of West Florida. This podcast is listener-supported. Contributions can be made via the listener support link on Spotify, or hey, you can buy me a coffee via the link in the show notes. This is your host, Mercedes Musto. Join me again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can pass the FCLE.